Hello.
Okay, so please, if you can mute your mics. Right.
Hello,
Yeah.
everybody.
So please mute your mics and stay off the camera when you are not speaking, because that one is going to make it easier. And we'll start in a couple of seconds. Okay, good morning from here, from Washington. We want to welcome you to the webinar focusing on sports analytics, or as Annalisa Mojica from the Philippines wrote when she registered for this webinar, what can be the relationship between numbers and coaching? I'm Vlad Spencer. I'm talking to you from near Washington, D.C. I'm with Ball Learning. Our moderator, Anata Devosian, is in Yerevan in Armenia. This webinar is part of the International Programming Sports Initiative of the State Department Sports Diplomacy Division, and is produced by World Learning and Digital Communication Network Southeast Europe Hub. We all remember the time when different sports were counting on the coach's eye or the coach's intuition to figure out players' talent, to figure out the way that the game was pursued, the potential strategy, what preparation is needed. Those times are increasingly over. Right now, coaches, administrators, athletes rely on data to make decisions, and this is how math and statistics and computers that we are using right now for this webinar have entered the world of sports and are changing the world of sports dramatically. By now, we all know how Zoom works. We count on your questions. You all know that there is a chat room. And keep in mind that our goal is not only the current conversation, hopefully it's going to be an interesting one, but mostly creating and developing a network. So use the chat to introduce yourselves, tell us about your organization, what you do, and most importantly, ask questions. As I said before, please mute your mics, and ideally, you could also be off camera to make this kind of technical flow better. And if you have questions, we'll read them from the chat, or we'll have maybe a couple of opportunities for you to ask the questions directly. That being said, welcome. We are very happy to see so many people in this chat room. And Anna, you have the floor.
Thank you, Vlad. I just want to say that we are glad to be back to our webinars after 2 months. So this is our first of this year. And I think that this is very interesting because nowadays, as Vlad mentioned, the data is helping all the athletes to grow and to develop. So our first speaker is from US, Patrick Carroll, Director Basketball Strategy and Analytics. He works in NBA, and I think that it will be very interesting to find out from Patrick how math help the athletes, the NBA players to grow and develop. Patrick, floor is yours, virtual floor. Welcome to our webinar.
Great, and thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone who joined. It's a little bit harder in sort of a virtual setting to gauge everybody's sort of reaction. So, if you want to put any comments or questions in the chat, that will, be helpful for me. But basically, my plan today is to show this group how the NBA uses analytics, and specifically on-court analytics to help improve the NBA product. And I know that the audience here is sort of coming from different ranges of size of organization, that everyone here isn't working for as big of an organization as the NBA, but I hope that everyone will be able to take something away from my presentation. So my department's function at the NBA is to allow the league to use data to essentially solve the problems that the league is facing, specifically on the court. And so, I only have 5-6 minutes here. I don't want to go into too much depth, but I think that it's really good to orient with some of the goals that our group has. And, the first goal that both the NBA as well as the department I work in, basketball strategy and analytics, has is to promote a safe environment for the athletes that participate in the league. So that means, that our players are healthy. So, that means whether they're not spraining their ankles, they're not hurting their knees, but also in 2021, that means that we're helping create an environment where they're safe from coronavirus, obviously. So, there are a lot of different ways that we help to effectuate this using data, and I'll get into that in a bit. But, I'd say the second goal is also to create a competitively fair environment. So that means that our teams are being fairly officiated, that our referees are not favoring one team or one type of style over another. And also more broadly, that every team has a chance to win the title, which is every team's goal at the beginning of every season. That's not to mean that on March 4th today that all 30 teams in our league have a chance at winning the championship, but it means in a long-term sense that all 30 teams think that they have a chance at winning the title over a period of 5-10 years. And then the third is, at the end of the day, we are creating a product that fans enjoy, that fans like to watch, and we want to help use data to create the most compelling product as possible. So that, again, the NBA is nothing without its fans. It's nothing without fans watching on TV, and hopefully with fans coming back into our arenas, they're going to create sort of the environment that people are so excited to see again. So at the end of the day, our third goal is making sure that the game itself is exciting to watch. So how we use data to sort of effectuate these goals, I'll break it into 3 categories. Hopefully we can go into a little bit more depth in the the question and answer section. But the first is very concretely changing our rules based on what data indicates to us, specifically on court rules a lot of the time. So we use data to analyze any sort of potential rules change, as well as when we do make rules changes, we use data and math to analyze how they've impacted the game. And so one easy example to think of is fans tell us that our games last too long and the end of our games last too long. So that is sort of that third goal I talked about, that we are not serving our fans by having a game that lasts as long as it does at the end of it. So how can we change that? One thing that we looked at was reducing the number of timeouts that teams have at the end of our games. And so we came up with this potential solution to solve for the fan enjoyment piece, but we also wanted to make sure that we were not sacrificing on the other parts of our goals when we were potentially making a change. So we use data to analyze the way that reducing the number of timeouts would affect recovery for athletes. So we looked at how often players would continue to play continuously throughout a game, and whether that caused them to run slower, caused them to get injured more often, caused them to perform at a lower level. And we found that if we reduce the number of timeouts, the number of stoppages at the end of our games, that it would not have an impact on how fast our athletes were running, how often they were getting injured, and their general recovery. And so we believed that this was a change that we could make that created a more compelling product without sacrificing on the safety component for our teams or the fairness component. And so that was something that we use data to help propose a rules change. The second is we have league-wide policies about how teams are constructed, how teams can acquire players, and things like that. And we use data to analyze any changes there. I don't really have time to get into details there, but I'm happy to talk about that in the question and answer. And then the third point, which is probably the project that I'm most involved in now, is game scheduling. So we use data to both come up with the strategies of how to schedule our games and then to implement those strategies. So one thing that we've heard from medical experts, from our teams, and from data looking at when players get injured, is that teams perform at a lower level and they get injured at a higher level when they're traveling a lot and when they're playing on consecutive nights. So if you play on a Wednesday and a Thursday, you're more likely to perform at a lower level than if you played on a Wednesday and then a Friday. And so this schedule really gets at all three of our goals, the safety goal, the fairness goal, and the compelling game goal. And so what we have done is we have used an algorithm to build our schedule. And so we build a schedule that minimizes how much teams are traveling. So instead of traveling from Los Angeles to New York and back to Los Angeles, they will travel from Los Angeles to Chicago on the way, and then New York, and then Boston, and then Washington, D.C. before traveling back to Los Angeles. So we're reducing travel. We're reducing the number of times that teams are playing on consecutive days. And then, most importantly, we are also creating a fair schedule that is, equalized across all 30 teams. So it's really hard without using a computer to build this by hand, but by using data and by using, the algorithm, we are able to create both a schedule that's best for all teams, but also that's fair across all 30 teams. So that's sort of the main overview about how my department uses data at the NBA. And I'd love to dive more into this in the question and answer section. But that's it for me for now. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. That was really interesting about the scheduling, because when we watch the games, we just see, okay, 2 days off and then they play. It looks very easy, but how you explain it, it's incredible how many details you use just to schedule the game. So I'm sure that we'll have lots of questions, but for now, I want to move to our next speaker. He's also from US, Vinay Malik. He's a managing director in Appmetics. Vinay, welcome to our webinar, and floor is yours. Vinay, can you hear us?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hi. Good morning, afternoon, evening. I know we have lots of time zones here. So yeah, thank you for having me. And Patrick, definitely appreciate, what's going on at the NBA besides just, seeing games at night. So that was really interesting. I appreciate that. I think my lens will be more on the programmatic side of, youth sports operators, which I think is a nice sort of yin and yang with Patrick's perspective. So I'm glad we're kind of, in tandem. I'll share a little bit around my background, and then I think that would help, give an idea of, of some of the things I'll cover here in these next 5 minutes. So my background is kind of unique, where I'm actually an engineer by degree, went to school for engineering, did that. So have some analytical problem solving skills that I learned in a university, very theoretical setting, applied that for a few years in the field as an engineer for a tech company here in the States. And then I changed careers and went back to school to become a teacher. So I taught high school math and engineering here in the States, but I also became a coach. And so as I was coaching football, basketball, track and field, all sorts of sports, and I'm in the Chicagoland area, I quickly started to see the need for analytics with showing the impact that sports participation had on the young people that I was working with. So not so much on the performance side, because what you see a lot of times in the youth setting, performance might not be as important as the impact of participation, whether it's on, social emotional well-being, academic achievement, self-esteem, things like that. And so then I parlayed that, my role in coaching, to then becoming an administrator of athletics at a network of schools here in Chicago. So I was the founding athletic director for a network of charter schools called Perspectives Charter Schools here in Chicago. And Patrick, one of your players, Anthony Davis, is a former student of ours. So really, one of our players, I guess, right? The NBA is all of ours, right, in a sense, so which is kind of neat. So in that sense, I moved into the administrative role, where I developed athletic programs, anything from, running or soccer, football, basketball, baseball, softball, a lot of sports where we were recruiting coaches to come in, start programs, develop programs. And then I provided the administrative support, right, which it was logistics and scheduling and things like that. And I did that for about 9 years and built that program from its sort of infancy to a somewhat sustaining mode, to where, we kind of, I know this is being recorded, we kind of did win the lottery and get a student like Anthony Davis to go through our system, which was pretty neat. And so in that role, I learned a lot about advocacy for participation in athletics, which all of you are proponents for because you're on this call. And to do that and to advocate for the right things outside of wins and losses and outsides of, personal accolades for athletes in terms of points and goals and tackles, it was around how they were developing as young people. And that term, SBYD, sports-based youth development, which I'm sure many of you have all heard in a variety of terms, that to me is what I saw in its essence, in its essence, and doing that on a daily basis. And the communities that I worked within in Chicago were some of the highest crime and tougher areas to kind of block outside noise for my students to focus on why they were at school. They had a lot of things pulling them in different ways. The crime, the violence. Home life might not have been the greatest for some of the kids I worked with. So to me, it was getting good coaches in front of them to be good role models and keep them safe and teaching them the fundamentals of whatever sport they were part of. And the one thing that we did is we used data there, obviously, for performance of our teams to see how teams were doing. We didn't do a lot on the individual side of it because, this was, 6th through 12th graders here in the States. But then also we took a lot of their academic data, their attendance data, their social emotional data, some qualitative data that we would see how our athletes would be as part of our school community and how they would be leaders or how they would be, silent leaders or vocal leaders. And that is where data, to me, I really started to crystallize, where we could have a player like an Anthony Davis who is in track to potentially be an NBA Hall of Famer, right? But then we also had kids that might never play sports past their 10th grade at our school, and that was okay too. And just seeing those similarities was really transformational for me as a leader. And so then about 4.5 years ago, after a really great run at Perspective at the school, I got introduced to a company called UpMetrics. And so UpMetrics is where I'm at now. And I was able to kind of collect my engineering background with my sports background and combine it all into one. And what UpMetrics does, we're a US-based, IT company that helps nonprofits, foundations with data collection, analysis, and impact reporting. So now I'm kind of combining all of that and working with many organizations. Most of them are stateside. We have a couple international, around figuring out what their impact is through sport. And so with that, it's kind of an extension of the work that we started, in my role as an athletic administrator. And now it's been really interesting to impact many more groups. And so I actually have a framework or two, Anna, that I could share with the call, if that's okay. Can I just
Sure.
share? Yeah, I'll show you all a couple slides and a framework or two. And if you have some pen and paper, this might be just some quick notes you might want to take away from the call. I think it could be pretty helpful. Let me just share my screen. So the one thing that when we work with groups, and for all of you on the call, as you think about data, including performance, and obviously there's output data, there's outcome data, there's performance data, there's all sorts of ways you can group it. But we like to, when we take engagements with organizations, we help them bucket their data into these categories, right? So the importance of storytelling, you want to be able to show impact through data. You can tell qualitative stories, and that's great. And that's a one piece of data, but always encourage you to have some quantitative as well. The idea of impact measurement. So is your impact, number of kids playing soccer, number of kids playing hockey? But what is that, and how do you measure that? As you build your programs, using data to help with design is very important. Fundraising is a big thing. I'm sure a lot of us on this call could use more funds for our organizations, and donors are usually more receptive when there's qualitative and quantitative numbers or just, or data behind the work that is being presented to them. How are you allocating resources, which kind of ties into program design a little bit in terms of coaches, facilities, equipment. Those are some examples there. And then the idea of learning, right? We're always all learning. And data is a great way to continuously learn in the role that you all are taking as coaches, which is, again, very phenomenal, and respect to all of you for doing that, because I know it's no easy feat. So when you think of your data in your organization, I really encourage you to think of these buckets And if you bucket your approach to your analytics to some of these areas, it might help you kind of clear the noise and really be more impactful with the work you're taking on. Really quickly, I also want to share this framework with you. It's a 4-step framework that we take on with any organization as we help them become more data-driven. So it's our 4-step process of define, collect, analyze, and leverage. So as you become more data-driven, or you are already data-driven and you want to reflect on what you are doing, this 4-step process is very helpful, and you can use it in many facets of the work that you all do with your respective organizations. So again, define, collect, analyze, and leverage, or the acronym we like to use as an organization is called DECAL. And so if you look at it, the idea of defining is, what does impact mean to you, and developing an impact framework. And as you're doing this, making sure the data you're collecting, if it's, Patrick talked a lot about performance data, that's great. If it's impact data, that's great, no problem. Just make sure you're all collecting the same data in your organization, and you have baseline metrics that you're looking to track. So if you're going to do these 3 things, everyone in the organization should be tracking them, and everyone should be consistent with how they're bringing that data in. And then collecting. So, we got some up metrics terminology in here, so just kind of bear with me on that. Make sure the data you're collecting is accurate, and make sure it's consistent. If you have 20 coaches, 5 coaches, 3 coaches, 5,000 coaches, it doesn't matter. If 2 coaches are not collecting the same data points, when we go back to that slide of what data drives in those 6 buckets, it will be hard to pull those insights out of your data if you don't have consistent data sets. Then the next piece is analyzing. So now you've defined, you've collected, and now you want to analyze your data. So you need a tool to use it. Can you use an up metric? Sure, you can use that. Great. I'm sure Patrick has tons of tools at the league office that they use. You can, Google Suite has a lot of great tools like Power BI, Tableau, obviously up metrics. You can do some data visualization in Excel, different things. Visualize the data to show people, visualizations of what the data looks like and the trends and where they are going. Most folks respond better to visualizations than they do lines and lines and lines of spreadsheets, or, chicken scratch on a piece of paper like I have right here, right? So really think about that analyzation piece. And the last piece, and I'll stop talking, is leveraging, right? So now you've defined, you've collected, you've analyzed a little bit. Now, what do you do with all this data, right? You've bucketed it in those 6 areas that we talked about on that first slide. And now, do you need fundraising, right? Do you need advocacy? Do you need to recruit more participants? Do you need to recruit more coaches? So now use the data to leverage the work you're doing and to storytell with your stakeholders around, the impact of your program and the work that you all are doing. So again, kind of this define, collect, analyze, and leverage is the process to take. And feel free to throw questions in the chat, and we can go from there.
Thank you, Vinay. Now we understand that the sports nowadays is not only running, jumping, or scoring. It takes lots of data, and we need to follow this data. So our next speaker is from Spain, my good friend Ruben Lezcano. He worked with the Armenian national team. He's a PhD at Camilo Jose University. And now, Ruben, floor is yours. You can introduce.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello, nice to be here. Thank you very much to Anna and Vlad to invite me to be here talking to you about data analysis in sport. I have my PhD in sport education. I'm specialized in soccer, and I'm going to try to explain something about data analysis in the selection of talented soccer players, because from my point of view, the data analysis is not the same in individual sport than in team sports. So to do this, I'm going to do a short presentation. I think my talk is going to be a little bit more practical, from a practical point of view, I think. So I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my screen. No.
Not yet. No.
And now?
Not yet.
No.
Not yet. Now we will make you a co-host. Aaron, please make Ruben co-host so we can share this.
Can you see now?
No, not yet. No.
No. Mm, Wait a minute. I'm going to try again. Uh, and now? Can you see now the presentation?
No.
No?
Just a second.
Alright.
Probably
Maybe I'm...
improvise a little bit, without a presentation, if we cannot show it.
And sometimes it's usual to use co-host. You can make co-host.
Yeah, we do.
I use it in my lesson, so maybe it's necessary for sharing the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, we
Sorry
did.
for interrupt you, but I many time I received this problem.
I'm going to send to Anna, and maybe she can project.
That's
Okay.
that's the power of the COVID period. We all learn more than we want to know about Zoom. So thank
It's
you.
all about that.
For educators, it's extremely important to actually master this medium. But until this transaction, the presentation is getting to Anna, and she could show it. One thing I could tell you is that what fascinates me about what you said is the fact that for me growing up, a long time ago when I was a kid and I didn't like math, that I think that if I heard a Vinay or a Patrick explaining to me how math connects to something very practical, like sports that I always love, I think would help many kids become more aware and more interested in mathematics. So it's fascinating to me, to see how math applies to a field that we've thought before is so detached from data. So that being said, Anna, do you have already the presentation or no?
I think now.
Perfect. Okay, so let's say it'll be.
Now, yes or no?
Yeah, but you shared the wrong screen.
The round screen, yes. Oh, no. Because it's not in my...
That's okay.
Should we do a question, and then in the meantime you could get the presentation set up, Anna? Yeah.
Yeah, we can have one question and then. Oh, yeah. I can open now. No.
Perfect. So yeah, you could.
Yeah. Perfect. Now I'm sharing.
Okay, so let's go to the presentation. Then we'll get to the questions after.
Yeah. Ruben, can you stop sharing the screen?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Now you should be able to see it.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Okay, let me start.
Okay. Well, this is a short presentation I made in Madrid in an international congress about talent development in football. Okay, you can see. Anna? Yes? Okay, let's move forward to the second slide. Okay, because I can't see you. I can't see anything.
You cannot see my screen?
No, I can't.
Okay, Vlad, let's go on with the question.
Perfect. Okay, so let's do that, and then you guys will let us know when you're ready.
Yeah.
So I have a question here from Matt Berassi, and it's addressed to Patrick. It says, which metrics teams care the most about or the least about? So when you go to the type of metrics that teams are aware or interested in, which metrics they're asking you the most about and or the least?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that our schedule process is one where we are balancing both doing our own research to figure out what is the most important metrics on our end for the highest quality game, as well as responding to the teams. And so the two ones that come up the most are the number of times that teams play on consecutive days, what we call back-to-backs, as well as the miles traveled across the season. So it's obviously very important to teams that they are, not putting what they perceive to be a disadvantage by playing on consecutive days, and also that they're not traveling around the country unnecessarily, because there is a lot of sports science around reducing travel and crossing time zones and how that relates to both injuries as well as performance. So to both maximize sort of the fairness as well as the excitement of the game, we focus very heavily on consecutive days, as well as on reducing travel.
Yeah, and in connection to this, there's another question from Mark Weinstein. He's asking if the reduction of travel impacts, in your view, the quality of play. Obviously, quality of play is something qualitative. It's hard to figure out, but still, that is, do you see at this early stage a correlation between the two?
Yeah, so one of the big things that we did this year was we scheduled, I think in Mark's question, he put this, we scheduled consecutive games in the same city, which typically we would do if a team were playing, for example, in Los Angeles, there are two teams. So we would try to have teams play the Lakers and then the Clippers on consecutive games. But this year we've actually expanded that to allow teams to play the same team twice in a row in an effort to reduce travel. So we're playing a more dense schedule this season, and players had a shorter layoff from the end of last season to this one. So we've done everything we can to help reduce the load on the players. And what's interesting is, despite the fact that we're playing more games not more games, but more games per week this season, we've actually seen a lot of metrics that we track improve. So teams are shooting a higher percentage from 3-pointers, scoring is up slightly. And, so there's a lot of indications that the quality of our game is actually doing very well, despite the challenges that are posed by coronavirus and, that have caused us to compress the season slightly. So we feel very good that the changes that we've made this season to reduce travel have actually been very effective in improving the quality of the game.
Great. So let's see. So Anna, are you ready, or otherwise I could go also to something else?
Let's try again and see if Ruben can see my screen. So let me know if everybody sees this.
Yeah, we can see, and you could tell Ruben, so Ruben could ask you to go from slide to slide.
You can go on your computer slide to slide, and I will show here.
Yeah.
If you
Ruben, does it work?
Ruben?
Hello.
Yeah.
Good.
Now I can see.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Let's go.
Okay. Well, I'm going to focus my presentation. I'm going to talk about data analysis from the point of identification and selection of soccer players. This is something really important. And if we move, Anna, let's move forward. It's something very important, but at the same time, it's something that has a lot of deficiencies. Most of the time, coaches, we're focused on the selection, or we are focused on the training. We think that training, we can get the most of our players, but this is not like this in team sports. If we don't make a good selection, it doesn't matter how good we train, we are not going to achieve our goals. And at the same time, depending on the levels, we have to face a lot of deficiencies in this process. We have deficiencies, for example, with the staff, We have deficiencies with the time. If we move forward, Anna, we don't have much time to train with our players, and we move forward. We have problems also with the education of our coaches. So let's move. Data analysis help us. Let's move forward. Help us again to optimize our resources, to optimize our time, to optimize all we have. There are too many tools nowadays we can use in soccer to analyze data. There are I think too many. The most important is not the tool. The most important is to know how to use the tool to achieve our goals. So let's move forward. Basically, we can analyze two things. We can analyze the player, or we can analyze the team. And when we analyze, we are going to analyze to make two types of reports. A simple report, and a database that help us to make decisions. A database where we can filter depending on what we are looking for. So from my point of view, the most important thing is the database, to create a good database, to get good results, to help us to make decisions. Now we have to talk about what is a talent. When we talk about a talent, what is a talent? Here I think we have two talents, and here we have another two talents. These two talents in their own area, and these two talents in soccer. So what is a talent? We have to define what are we looking for. Somebody with exceptional aptitudes. Let's move forward. Somebody who has been selected by experts. Somebody with high potential to achieve his goals. Somebody who needs a specialized training. Somebody with a high commitment in his task. Somebody with a social recognition, that everybody knows who is this person. Somebody who makes valuable creations. Somebody who can make things, fantastic things. And now, how can we select football players depending on data? Some of the speakers talk about different types of data. When we talk about data, what type of data? Basically, when we talk about the selection of soccer players, there are two lines. One line is focused on the genetic heritage. This reports, this research that have focused on how tall, how fast, what age, all this data. And the other one has been focused on sport development or sports development. How we have to train. What do we have to do to have more Messi, to have more Cristianos? But if we move forward, we can see that to develop talent is not only one or two things. There are many things, many factors. So now we have the multifactorial factors. And this is very interesting from the data analysis point of view. Basically, these are the main four factors. We have the genetic heritage, we have the sport development, we have the environmental factors, and we have the intrapersonal factors. If we move forward, these two factors are family and psychological characteristics. So we have to analyze all this environment. In addition, if we move forward, we have two more things. We need luck, and we need a good maturation. The players, they have to become mature in a good way. So this is like the environment to develop talents in soccer. I mean, in soccer or in team sports, because it's not the same a team sport and an individual sport. So now, what is the key point here? One more step is the talent identification. So to select good data. If we put a player inside this model, but is not the good player, if he doesn't have the good qualities to become a talent, we are losing the time. And we are not only losing the time, we are losing the money. There is a very good commercial, let's move forward, about Messi. If we click on play.
Hay 265 millones de jugadores de fútbol en el planeta. Altos, bajos, gordos, delgados,
There are
pelirrojos.
many different football players in the world with many different characteristics.
1999. Y eso solo uno. Debes tener mejores cualidades que el resto.
So you need You need good qualities to become a football player. You need your family. You need to become older to grow up. You need to train.
Un entrenador te enseña, confía
You
en
need a coach to give you a good opportunity.
con las lesiones que han truncado la carrera de 25
You need
millones
luck
de 24 jugadores.
with injuries.
La gente te reconoce.
You need to be focused.
La gran marca cree en ti, te patrocina y no te convierte en un modelo superfashion. No te distraigas, tú eres futbolista y todavía te quedan 87 a los que superar. Vence las críticas,
You
supera los
need
recuerda que el
a
fútbol
good
es
competition.
que tu éxito es el del equipo y el del equipo es el tuyo. Coge el balón cuando el partido esté difícil y supera a otros que también son muy buenos. Demuestra que eres el número 1. Al fútbol juegan 265 millones de personas. Solo uno es el mejor. Solo uno.
Okay, so there are too many factors we can analyze in soccer. Too many factors. There's not only one. So from the talent selection point of view, we have to analyze too many things. And in football, it's almost impossible. This is a tool that we have to use to help us in our decision, but it is not the tool. I mean, it's not the only way to make decisions. The selection of players is based on 3 areas. It's the identification. What are we looking for in these players? What abilities, what characteristics, how we want him or she to be. After, we have to select the player depending on his real potential. And when we talk about his real potential, we are not talking only about his abilities, his environment or her environment, where he lives, if he can train in a good way or not. So there are many things. And after the development, the training and the competition. So let's move forward. We have these 3 areas and let's move forward. And this is a cycle. Every time we select one player who is a local talent, we make identification, selection, development, and we have a regional talent. If he continues, we have a national talent. And finally, we have an international talent. So let's move forward. Finally, if we made a good selection, we have a professional football player. So this is the idea. This can affect, data can help us, not only from the sport point of view, but for the organizations, can help us from the economical point of view. Because there is a very, very close relationship between the economic impact and the performance in soccer. Here we can see Manchester United, Chelsea, Leeds. They spend the biggest amount of money during this season, and they achieve the first position in the stands. Let's move forward, Anna. You can see here they spend a lot of money, and they are the ones who spend less money. But in the middle, if we move a little bit more, here there are teams who didn't spend too much money, but they had very good results. From the economical point of view, this is very important for a club. And here, data analysis is very important. If we don't have many resources, we have to make good decisions to save our money, to save our time. So here, data analysis is basic. Okay, let's move forward. Finally, there are some deficiencies in talent selection because we usually pay attention what we can see, but we don't pay attention to what we are going to be able to see in the future. We have to look further, and for this, data analysis is very important. These deficiencies in talent selection are structural. Now we have more tools to analyze, and methodological. And inside the methodological deficiencies, we have, let's move forward. There are not clear criteria. What are we looking for? What data we need to analyze in soccer? What data we need to analyze in track and fields, in basketball? There is no specificity. We need to analyze the same data to select a central defender than to select a fullback or to select a striker. It's not the same. We have the relative age effect. depending on the age of the athlete, we have to analyze one data or a different one. We don't have enough information at the moment about this. And finally, the last one is that we don't have data to compare. There is a very good research in volleyball made in Brazil about this, where they got a lot of information about data about the performance of volleyball players, and now comparing the data depending on the age, they know if the player, if he or she have possibilities to become professional in the future. The problem in soccer is that the characteristics of the sport are very, very, very specific. In basketball, in soccer, the practical situations are very, very open, and it's very difficult to analyze data. Well, this is my talk, my speech. I hope you enjoyed, and sorry for the problems with the presentation.
Thank you, Ruben. It's fine. It's the technologists. When we meet in person, it will be perfect. that was really very interesting. And I think Vlad has one speaker more.
Yeah, it is fascinating to see these connections between different things that, us fans, we are not aware of, how complicated your lives are to actually, manage sports events and sports teams and individuals. Yeah, as Anna said, I think Laurel Schwarb, who's part of the audience, also works in the field. So I would like to ask her to briefly, maybe she could tell us a few words about what she does in connection to sports data and data science. So Laurel, if you could unmute and if you could come on camera, it would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vlad. And thank you everyone for letting me speak into this quite briefly. My work is focused right now on measuring sports impact on those that are disabled, actually in Australia. That's where we're doing our most work. And it's been a fascinating journey moving from sport for development, which is where we originally started, into this space, and looking at obviously the similarities across needs. Within sport, what you guys are all saying is as far as needing the data to back up the impact and allowing those objective readings to inform how we move forward for participants and for those patients as far as getting the care that they need is what we're centering on. So everyone within that ecosystem benefits from having better data and understanding better what those impacts actually are and being able to prove them. So my work is trying to make those things more visible. And let me know if there's anything I can speak into specifically there, but it's a huge need, and it sounds like within each of these spaces the same sentiment is echoed, that being data allows us to move forward more quickly, to improve, and to make sure that the experience of not only the athletes and the coaches, but the fans, the participants, the organizations, everybody benefits from a more robust data awareness and being able to apply that better. So let me know if there are spaces in there that I can speak more specifically to.
Definitely, and probably we should dedicate an entire webinar in the future to your work and your environment, because it's so important. So one question from Jamal Atkins, I think it was for Patrick. So I think Patrick, people are fascinated by this idea of changing the schedules of big NBA stars, and he's asking about the connectivity with the food intake. In other words, so when you make a decision about changing the schedules and the travel and everything, what other fields are impacted, including nutrition?
Yeah, so I think this question is very interesting, especially because of the tie-in with this year's sort of special situation around coronavirus, where in the past, not only are players and their routines being disrupted in terms of our schedule, we also have very strict protocols about what players are able to do on the road. So if a team were traveling, usually they would be allowed to go out for dinner, go to bars, go to restaurants and things like that. And now, for the most part, the team's only options are are limited to their hotels when they're traveling, and so it is causing both our nutritionists as well as the hotels to have to scramble to find good options for them while they're on the road. And so I think it's a huge challenge for the league as a whole, and specifically for the players, because a lot of times, because of our compressed season, they are playing one night on in New York, and then they fly to Boston that night, and they get in really late, and they have to eat at 1 a.m, and so their only option is to eat from the hotel. So it's been a focus of our league, both the teams as well as working with the hotels, to try to find nutritious options so that the players can continue to stay healthy throughout the season. And it's just one of the many adjustments that the teams have had to make throughout this very unique season.
So I said that it's stressful for the fans, because I have the feeling that Wizards are playing the same team every night. it's pretty confusing. Our beloved Wizards here in Washington. So another question is use of data to reflect mental performance. So let's go through our panel. So Vinay, any thoughts about this? So obviously, the metrics in terms of physical performance are probably more evident, but what about the mental? What about the psychology? As it was reflected in your work with youth.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work with measuring social emotional well-being or impact on athletes, but it's hard, right? I mean, quantitative data is numbers and easy to collect, and surveys and different ways to get that in. But with the qualitative measures, there's a lot of different ways to do that. So there's a few partners out there that we've worked with that have research-backed, evidence-based social emotional learning assessment tools that we've used, and then we would help deploy and then disseminate or bring that data in and kind of visualize it and use that as another component of the storytelling as it relates to analytics. But I think with the social emotional side, it can be very subjective. So I would just, we all should be cautious as we kind of embark on that side of things. Because again, it's not as easy as like a 2 + 2 = 4. So I would say those are some of the things on the social emotional side. But sometimes, even and between Patrick and Ruben, your work, the idea of simple surveys that you can send to your athletes to get some quick sort of pulse checks on how they're doing is a very easy thing to do, and a thing you can do very quickly. You don't need to be a PhD in psychology to do that. You can use some common sense and go through the survey yourself and think of questions are biased, are they not? Is this a fair snapshot of how the athlete might be doing? But if you really want to dig in deeper, then you might need to bring in some extra resources. But I would say survey-based analytics are always a quick way to get quick feedback, especially now with mobile devices. It's so easy to throw a survey together, get it out there and get some quick feedback relatively quickly. So
yeah, definitely. Ruben, so one thing I wanted to notice and acknowledge is the fact that the Spanish football coach calls the sport soccer. So I'm very encouraged by that, Ruben. Thank you for that. So for you, Ruben, so you explained a little bit, this aspect of selection of the players, but you coach in Spain, coach in Armenia. So what type of data do you use kind of on a regular basis in order to evaluate, the mental, not only well-being, but the mental performance of your players?
Well, in professional, you don't really use. With teens, yes. For example, in my PhD, I analyzed the parenting styles in almost 300 international soccer players, and we wanted to measure the impact of parenting styles in their development. But in professional, you can do this in soccer. You can do it with youth players. The type of data you use in soccer, I think is different. You try to analyze the category where they are playing, how many minutes, if they play from the first 11 or they start from the bench, all this type of data. But social data is not very common, at least here I think in the world, and in Spain, of course not.
Yeah, going along with this question that Alisa asked, actually the data on mental performance. One thing I want to ask you, and then I would like to ask Patrick the same thing in relation to this question, is coaches, the regular coaches, traditional coaches, maybe older generation, are they embracing this, wave of data coming at them, or they are preferring more or less the old tools, the old ways of coaching? Do they come to tell you, look, okay, what are you talking about? Come on, I know what I'm doing. My eye is sufficient. You don't need the data.
I think new coaches, new generations are including data in their daily work. But at the same time, I think that now there is we're a little bit overwhelmed with so many tools, so many data. And in the case of soccer or team sports, it's not the same like in individual sports, because the performance doesn't depend only on the execution. In team sports, the performance depends only in the perception, in the decision making, and this is very difficult to measure. In talking about middle or high performance, if we are talking about youth players in all levels, I think it will be very good to measure other type of data like social data, educational data. How do they study? Do they need to study? How are their parents? Who goes usually with them to the training session? All this type of information. But data is coming, but I think is at the moment is not going to be as important as we think is going to be, because there is a very important subjective part that depends on the knowledge of the coach. It's like an internal knowledge that you can't at the moment we can't get with these tools.
Yeah. Before getting to Anna's question, so to go to Patrick. So Patrick, you guys deal with big stars, both coaches and players, and so you are doing amazing work actually to develop this absolutely unbelievable league that NBA is. Are they resistant? Are they sometimes do they question the validity of data, saying I know better?
I would say that yes and no. The biggest challenge, and I think the biggest skill of a skilled data analyst, or someone that works in data, is the ability to translate their findings into something that makes sense to the non-technical audience. And I think that one important point is that we are not making a lot of what we do is really effective, and I think it's applying quantitative principles to challenging problems, which is good. But I don't think that we're reinventing the wheel a lot here. And if you look at what really high performing athletes have done over time, and you try to sort of apply analytic principles to them, you'll find that a lot of the best athletes have been basically already doing what the analytics would recommend. And there's a classic story of Greg Maddux, who was a pitcher for a long time, and he was a really skilled, didn't throw very hard, but was really good at placing his pitches and also mixing what pitches he threw. And in baseball, if you have one great pitch and you throw that pitch every single time, the batters will start to foresee that pitch is coming, and they'll be able to change their strategy. So even if you have one great pitch, you still want to throw other pitches at a certain rate, even if they're less effective. And that the value of throwing those other pitches is that it makes your best pitch better. And if you use some pretty complicated math, you can find that there's in game theory, there's this sort of ideal amount of time that you would throw a certain pitch and throw your other pitch. And the interesting thing is, if you go back and you look at Greg Maddux, he actually threw his pitches at the sort of rate that mathematically you would recommend to him. And so he would call it something other than analytics, but he was effectively applying analytics to his own his own pitching strategy. And so a lot of, I think what analytics professionals have to do is they have to make that connection with, the non-technical audience, and they have to make, explain themselves in ways that is clear and, connecting to what the athlete or the coach already knows. And so I think that, it is a hurdle that we have to continue to climb over, but I think that it is one that, as long as we make our findings, presentable and, clear in the way that the athletes and coaches are familiar, it is one that we can, gain credibility and, be able to affect change over time.
Yeah, so it goes back to what I said a bit earlier about my experience as a kid, making sense of mathematics, showing how math makes sense in real life and what does it mean, which very few teachers do, and you would be a very good teacher actually trying to explain that. So now, we have a little bit of time left. So Anna, if there is any question for the panel, and then we'll go towards the end to Ryan.
Yeah, there are some questions, but I have my own question to the panelists. So we talked about the professional athletes that we use data, collect data from their performances. I want to know, let's say if we have 10 years talented player or individual player or team player, can you use data to make him like Messi or, I don't know, LeBron James? Can we start to use data to develop the player when he's 10 years old? So let's go to Patrick and then everybody else.
I think that there are a lot of ways that you can use data, and I think actually that the two other panelists here would probably be better to speak to them. But I think that what we found at the NBA is it is a combination of nature and nurture. It's a combination of what innate talent you have as well as the development that you have. And we have done a lot of research about youth development, specifically around how to create the next sort of generation of NBA stars. But our main focus has been looking at high school players and taking the high school player and turning him into an NBA star, whether the best pathway to improvement is through a minor league system or through the collegiate system. And I think that it is an open question. If I had the answer to this, I would be a billionaire. But I think that the key is just important to get them developing and playing as young as possible. But I think that Ruben and Vinay will probably speak to this a little bit more, because their work is more closely tied to that.
Yeah, thank you. I think we should all do research and become billionaires to develop the players from 10 years old. Okay, Ruben.
Well, I think it's not a. It depends on the sport. I think it depends on the sport. I think if we in sports, you can have you can get an approach. You can have some idea if the player, if he has some abilities that in the future, if he's going to be able to have a good performance, but it's not 100%. But in individual sports or in sports where the environment is close, where they don't have to make too many decisions, or the situations they repeat always the same situations, it's easier to make this decision. But in sports where everything is changing too fast, it's difficult. Anyway, here we are talking about the most important here is make good decisions about if the player or if the children, if they have the good qualities to go into this development process, because we are going to give him more opportunities in a good team with good coaches, with more time to train. So if we give the opportunity to play to people who doesn't have the qualities to become professional, we are losing the time and we are losing our money. For example, Messi, Newell's Old Boy say no to Messi, and after Newell's Old Boy, Messi went to Barcelona. So you can imagine how much money they lost in this operation. So
yeah, this is the good example. So, Vinay, let's hear you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very, I mean, I honestly think it's a hot topic. It's a touchy topic. Again, I've been on the development side of things, so I'm again not looking more at who the next pro is or who the next elite athlete is. I mean, the example I brought up earlier of a former student of mine, I'm about 6'1" tall. I'm extremely thin. And this gentleman Anthony Davis was the same build as me as a ninth grader. And by the time he was a 12th grader, 4 years later here in the States, he was almost 7 feet tall. So it doesn't matter how many, any analytics you ran on that young man as a ninth grader, he obviously didn't have the trajectory to be an NBA player at that point. But when he added 10 inches to his frame, he quickly built that trajectory, right? So then analytics gets thrown out the window. I think Ruben and Patrick brought up some good points around good coaching, youth development, right? The idea of supporting the young people mentally and physically. But yeah, I mean, there's stats out there, right? I mean, look at the NFL draft. I mean, they measure the size of the quarterback's hands, and they, say their potential of their, stardom or their success can be tied to physical attributes. So I always think those metrics are out there. I think they're good to reference. I don't think we should cloud the mind of young people with those at an early age, because there's an adverse social emotional side to that, which I would encourage all of us to avoid. But I do think in certain parts of the world where youth development for professional sports happens at a very early age, depending on who is around that young person, I could see those metrics coming in handy if that's how that adult wants to shepherd that young person. And I leave that up to the family if that's something they want to do. Not what I would do, but again, there's definitely different schools of thought out there to do that. So.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Vinay, and I'll go back to Vlad.
So actually, we have probably time for one more series of questions. So one thing that I would like to ask you, and it was asked by many people, and I apologize for those questions that will not be asked, but speakers see it in the group, in the chat, and we'll answer later. One question that kept coming, when people register, is that, I'm a coach. I coach youth. I don't have access to the sophisticated technologies that you guys use, the computing power and all this stuff. What can I do to still be connected to the world of analytics? What can I do with modest means to be able to actually, have this, function still open to me and in order to develop the sport? So let's start with Patrick.
So I would say that it really depends on sort of your level. At the youth level, I think that there's a lot of simple ways that you can implement data type things that aren't necessarily very technically involved. But I obviously am not a practitioner of youth sports, but I can think of a lot of very simple ways that you can apply analytics to your organization that aren't necessarily involve a lot of programming power and things like that. Something as simple as asking your players to tell you how they feel on a 1 to 10 scale before every practice. That alone would give you some sort of gauge as to how they are performing, how they are recovering, and that is analytics. And so I think that sometimes it is intimidating to enter this field that if you have no background in it, and at the end of the day, applying mathematical principles in a very, very simple way is hugely impactful, and it doesn't have to be a really complicated algorithm or super intense research, but just implementing very simple things, I think, can have a large impact. And so that example I just gave, you ask players to tell you 1 to 10 how well they're feeling before every day. You would be able to identify things that were causing players to recover poorly or causing players to recover, well, and that alone in a youth sports setting is not hard to implement. But I just think that you don't want to let perfect be the enemy of good. And so just starting somewhere is, I think, can have a huge impact.
Definitely. And Ruben, also you coach in different environments. So how does this apply? Obviously, technology is not always equal. So what do you do if you don't have that type of access in order to actually accumulate and make decisions based on data?
Well, you can, as Patrick said, you can always take data. It depends on the level, but I think one good ability of a coach is to find resources or sources to find data. It's sometimes there are many websites you can find information, and sometimes depending on what type of information you want to get, you can just ask the players, like Patrick said, how do you feel today? How was the session yesterday? And you can collect data about this, or you can collect your data after your matches, or you can analyze your own matches, because now it's very simple to record your matches and take your own data, depending on what do you want to get, how many passes in this area. It depends on your goal, and of course it depends also on your level. It's not the same what you are going to record if you are coaching children that if you are coaching professionals. It's different.
And for you, Vinay, a question. Same question to some extent, but also, you work with schools, and you work also with civil society organizations. And, one thing that we do through these exchanges that State Department sponsors is to use sports as a tool for education. And I cannot imagine a better example than what we are doing now. Did you ever think or did you know examples when, all this, sports data science was applied to actually teaching, science and mathematics to kids, taking advantage of the fact that, sports is such a common passion for all kids and, most people.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Vlad. And my journey was as a a 10th grade math and geometry teacher. So wherever I could tie in, if I had a sports centric class in terms of the interests of my students, I could easily roll that in. I think, back to the NBA, I think one of my projects in one of my classes was looking at, the 1996 Bulls or 97 Bulls, which was a team here in Chicago that was, close to me growing up. And we took their stats over the season and then taught students how to use functions in Microsoft Excel. Again, bear me on the dating of the software. There was no Google Sheets back then. And we used that to, learn functions of average, median, min, max, and just writing simple equations in Excel by doing that. So yes, so Vlad, to your point, I think there's ways to do that when all of us as coaches have that opportunity. I would encourage you to get an idea of who your students are and who your athletes are and what they need, and then modifying that for them. So that would be one part. And then to Patrick's point, I think Patrick brought up a really good point around the idea of getting started with something is important. And it could be as simple as just giving, and I think Ruben said this too, like post-game surveys and post-game quick 5 questions, to get feedback on how your athletes are doing. Don't think you need, and I use this term lately now, don't think you need to boil the whole ocean, right? You just got to worry about, the kids that you're in charge of or the athletes that you're in charge of. And if it's 5 kids, if it's 10, if it's 50, just focus on that. And you can, spin up a quick survey in 10 questions and get it out. And that's a start. And don't think you need this whole long process and drawn out. Just know when you bring that data in, it might be imperfect, but that's okay. You have a start. And then the last thing I'll say is when you do that, anchor it back to that 4-step process I talked about of define, collect, analyze, and leverage. Because if you bring that data in and you don't know what to do with it next, then you're just wasting your time, and you don't want to waste your time. You want to make the time that you have as impactful as it can be. So always kind of do it with some purpose, and then you'll start to see some results on the back end.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So we are getting closer to the end of this program. As Anna said, we are very happy to actually bring these webinars back to the audience. We didn't do the first one this year, and I would like to invite State Department Sports Diplomacy Program Officer Ryan Murphy. Before doing that, I would like to tell the audience that we are obviously in the International Women Months, and then 2 weeks from now we are going to do a webinar on sports and women and sports. Anna, who's actually the member executive committee of the Armenian Football Federation, what you could call it soccer federation, is going to lead that. Again, it's another fascinating topic, and we hope to bring women represented in a variety of sports. So that being said, hopefully Ryan is still with us and could say a few words or ask a question about this webinar, this topic, or in general about sports diplomacy and what we are doing during these troubling COVID times.
Yeah, thank you to Vlad and Anna for putting this webinar on, and to our panelists, obviously Patrick and Ruben and Vinay, but also Lauren for jumping on and doing a kind of ad hoc question and answer. We appreciate that. As Vlad said, it's definitely a unique topic within the sports diplomacy division at the U.S. Department of State. Our mandate by Congress is people-to-people exchanges. So it's really bringing communities together through sports. And around a year ago, we pivoted to doing a lot of things virtually. So it allowed us to really take a look at how we engage these communities. And World Learning has done a great job with these webinars to bring people from all over the globe together for this hour and a half, a couple times a month, to really just discuss these very relevant topics within sports. So this one is one that we hadn't done before, but again, there's a lot of passion for it and a lot of great expertise that we were able to bring to the table. Just obviously thankful to our partners at the NBA for being able to allow Patrick to sit in on this and provide his expertise, as well as all of you for really just sharing the great work that you're doing within sports analytics and how it's really continuing to revolutionize sports. It's certainly a topic back when I was in school that wasn't really an option for me in the sports world. But it's great to see so many different uses for this information and data, and I appreciate everyone being involved. So again, just thank you all for being involved in this session, and we look forward to the session in a few weeks on women's sports. Again, it's Women's History Month, and also on March 8th is International Women's Day. So we appreciate everyone being involved in that and bringing that topic to the forefront as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ryan. So thanks to the audience. We hope to see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you, Patrick, Vinay, and Ruben, for being part of this very interesting panel. Definitely a fascinating topic, and hopefully we're going to get to talk about this before. Thanks to my moderator, Anna, and also the World Learning colleagues, Aaron and Laurel and Nicole. See you soon. Thanks for being with us.